a couple of familiar faces, people have come to our class before, so thanks for coming by. ISA is the International Society of Arboriculture. That's, yeah. Yeah. So basically what the structure of this is going to be, I'll talk for about an hour and we'll go over everything on this little handout you've got, talk about it more in depth, some information about it, some solutions where they're warranted, and then at the end we'll have a Q&A. So if you've got questions, just write them down on there and then we can go over everything afterward and have a little bit more dialogue in the class. But for the first hour, I'll mostly just be yapping. So without further ado, we'll start with the big question. What are pests? It's not really something that has a definition that you can point to that's going to be consistent in every municipality, or every state, or every country, because it really varies. There are some species that are kind of universally recognized as pests, you know, like grasshoppers or other insects that tend to damage crops a lot. But there are other situations where a pest may only be a pest to you, or it may only be a pest to a certain plant and not to other plants. So keep in mind, there's always some degree of nuance when it comes to pests. And, you know, sometimes it's something that's invasive, so it's not native to the area, and they may need to be controlled a little differently. Sometimes a pest is native and it might just be those saying that pests, the definition of pest requires a little more nuance than most people might expect. So with pests, you know, it'll be something that's directly damaging your plants. Maybe they're chewing on the foliage or interrupting the flowering or the fruiting some way. Or maybe it's more of an indirect scenario where they're causing, you know, like aphids, as I'm sure we all know and love. They do cause some degree of direct harm, but they also do other things that can cause more indirect harm, like they can lead to greater fungal issues, or they can lead to other pests hanging out in the area. So there's a degree of, varying degrees of what kind of damage a pest will do. We're going to talk a little bit about the tolerance of pests as well. So does anyone here grow plants commercially? Most people don't. Unless you're growing plants commercially, it may not need to be that you have to have a perfect pest-free garden. Keep that in mind. Not only is it not very feasible, it's also not really recommended, because the amount of work you'd be putting into it is substantial. So keep in mind, maybe your tolerance for pests should be higher than 0. Okay? That might sound kind of controversial, but we'll talk about why that's important. If you've got pests, that means you've got a living ecosystem, and your yard isn't just silk trees and a little IKEA display. Okay? We're all part of nature, whether we like it or not, and so we need to act accordingly. There are some pests that actually provide a benefit. Welcome to take a seat if you like, by the way. You know, for example, a lot of people are aware of monarch butterflies, right? In their larval stage, you know, that we're trying to support, they are destructive to the plant that they're on. So there are some pests that end up having a beneficial life cycle later, or maybe it's something that we're okay with them doing damage because the pros outweigh the cons. So in some cases, it's worth, maybe you don't treat, maybe you keep them around, maybe learn a little bit more around them. And the big part that we'll go over this is, with the right practices in place, pests can be managed. Okay, so maybe your tolerance shouldn't be 0. That doesn't mean you have to let your yard do whatever it's going to do. You can still manage pests and keep populations down, and fulfill your needs and the garden's needs together. It doesn't have to be one or the other. And a big part that goes into that is going to be IPM. Has anyone heard of IPM here? Integrated pest management is what it means. And this is a practice that you'll see applied to commercial growers, wholesale growers. We have an IPM team here. We have a team of people that do nothing but IPM. But you can also do it in your yard. It doesn't have to be a large-scale operation. It can just be you observing and making some careful decisions about what's going to happen in your landscape. I'm going to jump out a little bit to the pyramid on your handout here, okay? So at the very bottom, it's going to start with identification and education. That's your foundation of anything that you're going to be doing. You have to make sure you know what it is you want to go after. If there's any uncertainty, make sure you find out before you start treating, because it might be ineffective or you might cause more harm than good. So you want to know what you're dealing with first, and then you also don't know what sort of stuff you're going to be applying if you need to. This pyramid goes up at the bottom, lowest cost, can even be free. As it goes up, it gets more expensive. As it goes up, it also gets harder. You're getting more in the intervention instead of the prevention. So you want to always start at the base here and then work your way up if you have to. The next step is cultural. So that's proper plant care and spacing, sanitation, crop rotation, choosing the right plants for your yard. You know, some plants have genetics that are more disease or pest resistant from the get-go, right? So just choosing the right plants and planting them properly is your first step of defense. Then you're going to get into the more mechanical side of things. So that's hand removal, spraying with water, trapping with crops or actual traps, and then netting, you know, keeping things off. So these are going to be physical barriers that'll prevent pests from doing damage. Your next step up, it's the one I like the most, biological. That's going to be, you're going to control with beneficial insects, biopesticides, biofungicides, pathogens. So these are controls that you apply that instead of having a chemical action where they disrupt the pest in some way, it's a biological control. So that tends to be a little more targeted and safer. And then at the very top, the last tool that you reach for is chemical. That's your insecticides, fungicides, herbicides. Notice that's the last thing that you should look for. Again, it goes up in cost, it goes up in ability, the lesser likelihood of control, the higher up that pyramid you go. So a lot of people think, oh, I've got some kind of pest, what spray do I need? You might need to get there at some point, but you shouldn't start there, okay? So I just wanted to go over that and have some familiarity with it, because that's kind of what our control is going to be based off of. So if we go back up to the integrated pest management part here, IPM is a sustainable practice of controlling pest populations and damage in a space using various strategies, including identification, prevention, and action thresholds. So again, you first start with finding out what it is you're trying to treat. How can you prevent it? Because that's always easier. It's just like with us. Humans, diseases, it's way easier to prevent and stay healthy than it is to try and treat something when it comes up, right? And then you'll work your way up as needed. I do want to point out a few important things about chemicals, because I know, again, that's what most people are going to think of first. I've got a few things here that we'll talk about. I'm going to keep harping on this. You might get sick of me saying it, but diagnose the problem first before using any product. Sometimes a lot of folks come in, hey, I've got a problem with my grass. What do I use? If I don't know what it is, I can't help you. It could be, even if you've got a picture, something like a fungal disease, grubs in your lawn, drought stress, chemical stress, they all look pretty similar. So you need to make sure you accurately diagnose the issue first. If you've got a fungus and I sell you a pesticide, or insecticide, it's not going to do anything. So at best, you're wasting money, right? At worst, you're causing damage. Chemicals are ideally a last resort. Again, that's the last thing in the toolbox. And then you always need to follow label instructions. The label is the law. I'm saying that literally. Any chemical is regulated by the EPA. That's a federal agency. So these are federally regulated. And if you don't use it in a way that follows the label, you're breaking the law. If you end up causing damage, say you accidentally spray your neighbor's trees, or you spill some of this and harm your neighbor's plants, you can't plead ignorance. You have to read this in its entirety with any chemical that you use. It's going to keep you safe, and it's going to reduce the risk for harm overall. There are some chemicals that can do some damage to us and other plants and other organisms, so a big part of it's just being safe when you're using these. One big thing, a higher dose is not necessarily more effective than the recommended dose. Use something at double strength, you're not really going to get double the results. You're just going to increase your chance for doing the wrong kind of damage. Same thing. You can parallel that with the human body. If you take a medicine at a higher dose, your risk for toxicity goes way up, and it might not even work better. It might work worse, less effectively. Be aware that broad spectrum insecticides can harm beneficial insects and pollinators. So there's a whole ton of them out there. Something like 7. It's a really popular compound. I'm sure a lot of people have heard of it. This is broad spectrum insecticide. So this works on, you can sense it on the back, yeah, it kills over 700 listed insects. So it is not gonna specialize in any one particular front. It's gonna do a whole lot of stuff. Sometimes that's needed. This, though, is the tool that's like, okay, you don't know what you're spraying, you probably shouldn't be spraying it anyway, right? You need to figure out what it is you're treating with. This, super affordable, accessible, it's easy to use. This is the first step for a lot of people. It should be one of your last steps, okay? Being non-selective, it can harm anything you spray it on. Better control, whether chemical or biological, is going to come from more targeted sprays that maybe only harm a particular type of pest or a particular stage of the life cycle, or it has a limited effect on some of the beneficial stuff. So those are the ones you want to go after first, and we'll talk about some of those that I've got here. And overuse and misuse of chemical pesticides can result in resistant pest populations. There's another reason to not use your last option, the nuclear option, all the time. Is, let's say you kill 99.99% of aphids with this, that remaining population will reproduce, and then you have the problem all over again, and then this doesn't work anymore. And you'll keep spraying it, you're introducing harmful chemicals in the environment. Again, it's not having an effect. It's really not the first route to go to. Again, you might get sick of me saying that, but I want to hammer it in, okay? Same thing with like antibiotics in humans. If you take the same stuff over and over, you'll have problems. So this 7 here is really the only conventional compound I brought out here. There's a ton of different ones, but they all kind of follow the same rule of generally being non-selective. There are some other ones here that I really like. So neem oil, I'm sure many people have heard of this. This doesn't have a direct insecticidal effect. This works primarily by smothering things because it's an oil. So it can smother, insects don't have lungs like we do, they just breathe through their bodies. So if you can plug up those holes they breathe out of, it takes them out. Sometimes the oil is necessary to help break down a waxy coating that's on the insect. This also works for fungal pathogens because fungus also needs, room to breathe and grow. So something like neem oil, I'd almost put it under that mechanical part of your pest control pyramid because it works mechanically. It doesn't work as an actual compound. It has antimicrobial effects, but that's not what does the damage. Sorry, we'll save questions till afterward. Just for the sake of keeping it expedient and succinct. But write them down because we'll talk about it afterward. So neem oil, this is something that you see by itself, or you'll see it in a lot of other compounds, like neem oil plus something. Sometimes you'll see like the triple action spray that we sell. It's like neem oil plus pyrethrins, which that's what's in 7. Or a chemical related to what's in 7. So that does have a direct insecticidal effect, but this is a really common thing that you'll see as a mix as well. BT, this is a biological control, so this is a bacteria. This only affects the larval stage of some insects. So it doesn't do anything to adults. This sold as caterpillar killer, but it kills the larval stage of a few other things. This is something that gets into the pest and it disrupts their gut activity and it kills them that way. So it's not harmful to plants. It's not going to be harmful to adults, again, of any stage, whether that's bees or even butterflies themselves. Of course, you don't want to actively spray any of those things, but if you get a little drift with something like this, it's not the worst thing in the world. So this would be really useful for like tobacco budworm, cabbage whites, tomato hornworm, that kind of stuff, the caterpillars and worms essentially. This works quite well. Since it is biological and it only works on a certain stage of the pest, timing is really important. So you need to spray it when the larvae is actually present, or you've seen a couple and their eggs are hatched and they're starting to get more mature. This is when you start spraying this stuff. So timing is important. That goes for everything here. Timing is crucial. That's going to give you the best results is if you time your applications properly. But on some things, it just won't even work. You'll have no effect. So make sure you time it properly. On the bottom of this handout here, we've got this USU Pest Advisory QR code. If you're not signed up for it, you should. It's a great idea. It's the Utah State Extension Service, and they will send out newsletters occasionally about when a particular pest is becoming more active and what to do about it if you need to. So if you sign up for that, that can help you keep timing. That can keep the timing a little more aligned and easy for you. Otherwise, you're actively out there looking for particular pests. Here's another one that's biological, mosquito bits. So this works for mosquitoes and also works for fungus gnats, which I'm sure we've all had at some point, whether inside or outside. This is the same, it's the same kind of species of bacteria as this. It's just a little bit different. This works by soaking it in water, and then you apply that water to your plants, and the bacteria takes care of fungus gnat larvae and mosquito larvae. So it won't do anything to the adults, but it kills that larval stage. So that prevents the adults from breeding because there won't be any left. So this is another way that's like quite safe to use. Any of these bacterial and biological controls don't have an effect on humans or pets or anything, wildlife, unless it's an insect, so be careful you're not applying this into, if you've got a canal or anything nearby, because you don't want to do damage to non-target organisms. That goes for everything, of course. Kind of in line with neem oil, spinosad soap. This is a compound that's derived from a yeast that was found in an old rum distillery on some island in the Caribbean. Can't remember where. So this works in two ways. The spinosad component has these chemicals called spinosyn. When an insect ingests it, it paralyzes them. So it has to be eaten for it to be harmful. Again, this will reduce your chance of hitting non-target organisms. So this works for earwigs, root weevils, anything that's actually eating the leaves. The soap form here also works for a few other insects that don't eat, like aphids. They just suck the juice out of plants. Being that this is a compound that only insects are sensitive to, it's not really going to be harmful to humans, pets, that kind of stuff. This is something that you can use safely, even on plants that are in bloom, as long as you're making sure that the bees are not out at that given time, and of course you avoid spraying the flowers. This is listed for organic use, so you can use it in any garden, whether it's conventional or organic. Oftentimes these organic controls, even if you don't want to do organic stuff, are a good first step, because generally they're quite effective. Your chance of harm is significantly lower, and oftentimes they work just as well if you're using them properly, right? Something like BT, a couple of these other ones are also organic. Here's a big one that a lot of people are going to be curious about. This is what you use for grasshoppers, okay? So this is a conventional insecticide. It's carbaryl, but it's in a bait. This is in wheat bran. So this, again, something that has to be ingested for it to be harmful. So it's not gonna, this is called EcoBran. Yeah, and the active ingredient is carbaryl, but the product is EcoBran. This bag covers about 2 acres, so a little goes a long way. You've got a lot to work with here. There used to be a bacterial control for grasshoppers called Nolo bait. It's no longer available, unfortunately. So this is really your best option for controlling grasshoppers. This works best if you use it when grasshoppers are still in their nymph, their younger stages, because they don't have to eat as much of this. The larger the grasshopper, the more it has to ingest, and therefore the less effective it's going to be overall. You can apply this around like pets and everything. It's quite safe. Don't put it around if you have like chickens or anything that are going to be actively eating it. The amount a non-insect would have to eat to actually get sick is really high. so it's not very feasible. But you know, with anything, of course, be careful. Again, always read the label. Yep. Yeah, just throw it in a cup, spread it around. It's got application rates on here if you've got like larger property, if you're doing it by like hundreds or thousands of square feet. But it's something that you can't really overdo necessarily because it is a bait. And it does need to be reapplied occasionally because the sun will break it down after about 3 weeks, or if it's getting wet, like from your irrigation constantly, it's going to lose some of its efficacy. So you do reapply this occasionally. Exactly. Yeah, any bait you do need to reapply just as needed, essentially. So that's just a smattering of a few chemicals that you can use. I'll talk a little bit about two just basic options for a few different pests. You know, if you've got a particular one in mind, you know, write that question down. We'll go over it, but I'll go over some stuff. So just common issues.
You get the suds soap on flowers, and you have to like wash it off or anything. I'm totally in organic gardening, and I don't want to hurt my bumblebees and stuff like that.
Just avoid spraying as much as possible. There isn't research that shows that it's going to be super harmful to bees, but be careful regardless. Okay. So for something like aphids, that's a very common issue that many people have in Utah. Spinosad soap works great. Okay. This is a very effective control and quite safe to use. Aphids tend to really congregate around parts of the plant that are going to be producing, that are getting a lot of energy. So you see them often on rows, like right on the buds, for example. They also, aphids really don't love the heat. So by now you should really, you really won't be seeing many. So if you do need to treat, because one thing I want to say is doing nothing is often a valid option. Like aphids, they're not going to kill your plant. They just make it look kind of bad for a while. If you are catching them early in the season, you can use spinosad, and that'll reduce the numbers pretty significantly. You can also use predatory insects. We'll go over those in kind of the last half of the presentation. Like ladybugs are one that a lot of people are familiar with, or praying mantises, lacewings. We'll talk about those, but the aphids are really easy to prey upon for those beneficial insects. Scale is something that you'll often see on typically trees. You don't really see it on herbaceous plants as much. That's another one that trees or whatever plant it's on can live with without too much of an issue. You know, many times plants can tolerate a fair amount of pest pressure without dying or anything like that. But if you do need to, again, timing, you're going to use like a contact insecticide when they're young. And sometimes you need to use a systemic for adults. I didn't bring any systemics controls over here, but I'll talk about them a little bit. That's one of the last things you should reach for. That's a compound that makes the plant itself toxic to the pest. So like neonicotinoids, I don't know if anyone here has heard of those. That's something that's very harmful to bees, for example. That is a systemic insecticide. So you don't spray it on a plant, you pour it in around the root system, the plant drinks it up, and instead of needing to like spray an insect directly, these compounds make the plant tissue toxic to the pests. So it works the other way around. Sometimes that's needed if it's you've tried everything else and nothing's working and your plant's going to die, but that can be harmful to a lot of non-target organisms, which is something you really want to try and reduce. So I didn't bring any out here, but like anything with the neonicotinoid, like imidacloprid, that's like the default one that a lot of people use. Many of like the grub killers or systemic insect control are going to have that compound in them. So that's some things like scale. When they're an adult, you can't really spray them with anything because they have a coating on them that repels it. Sometimes that's what's needed. Let's see. Some things like, if you've got an apple or a peach or a pear, cherries, you get wormy fruit. That's a variety of pests that do that. It could be fruit flies, sawflies, codling moth. On those, timing is crucial, and it's going to vary depending on the pest. That's another reason to sign up for that pest advisory from Utah State, because they'll tell you when you need to start considering applications. Oftentimes, if you can catch them right when the adults are coming around to lay their eggs, or when they're in a vulnerable stage, you can take care of the issue pretty easily and cheaply. It's when you wait and it becomes more of a problem, they're burrowing in your fruit, that you need to start reaching for more drastic controls. So timing, especially for those, crucial. Let's see, grasshoppers, talked a little bit about. Spider mites, we'll talk about. They're not actually an insect. They are an arthropod, but they're more closely related to spiders than they are to bugs. So traditional insecticides don't really work because they're not insects. So that's where something like neem oil works really well because it'll smother them. But keep in mind for spider mites, since they're not an insect, the treatment can be a little bit different. And again, if you have issues with any particular one, write those down. We'll go over them.
Besides like boxwood, what spider might bug?
Conifers, most
Okay.
kinds, like pines, spruces. They're kind of a generalist, so they'll go over a lot of stuff.
I have spider mites, but they don't tend to bug any of my plants.
Yeah.
So I just always
And like I said, doing nothing is a valid option sometimes. So you don't always need to treat them. Let's see how much time we got left. Okay. Again, if you got questions about any pests, write those down. We'll go over it. But now we're going to start talking about beneficial insects. So that's on the other side of your hand out there. It's going to be pollinators, predatory insects. There's plenty of things that are not necessarily one or the other. They might just be neutral in your landscape. But we'll talk about some of the things that are going to be interacting a little bit more directly in your yard. So beneficials, that's a common term that you'll hear us use around here, especially our IPM team. That's just a term that generally refers to insects that provide a benefit to us. So that might be something that's predatory, that takes care of the nasty bugs, or it might be something that's a pollinator, like a bee or a butterfly, that helps our plants to grow and help us provide food for the world and whatnot. So it's kind of a catch-all term. Keep in mind, beneficials rarely eliminate or eradicate a pest population. Trying to eradicate a pest population isn't really recommended either. It's going to be hard and it's going to cost you a lot of money. So oftentimes just reducing the pressure to the point where it's no longer that harmful is going to be your goal. Beneficial insects rarely completely eliminate a pest. Let's say you've got a ton of aphids, you put ladybugs out, they're not going to eat every single one because they want a food source too, but they'll reduce the numbers to the point where it's not necessarily causing you damage anymore. So don't look for eradication. It's not really feasible. Some beneficials are going to be specialists. So there are many like predatory mites. I'll talk a little about this. Instead of spider mites, they're a mite that eats other detrimental pests, and they can be very specialized. It might be that there's a species of predatory mite that only eat one kind of mite, or a predatory like parasitoid wasp that only affects one type of organism. So those are very specialized. Generally, they're quite effective at what they do, but they do need that particular one. So that's where identification really is crucial, because if it's not ID'd properly, you might not have much effect. And then some beneficials are going to be generalists, so they'll just go over a bunch of stuff, like praying mantises and lacewings. They just eat a bunch of different things. Ladybugs to a degree as well. So that one is not as important. You still want to ID, of course, regardless, but there's a little more wiggle room there. That specialization and generalization goes for a lot of other stuff too, like pollinators. So there are some plants that are only pollinated by one type of insect, or there are insects that visit a lot of stuff. So there are beneficials that you can buy commercially. For example, we sell, it's a little late in the season now, but we sell ladybugs, we sell praying mantises, lacewings, that kind of stuff. We have nematodes as well, which are kind of another class that we can talk about. And then some are going to occur naturally. They'll be existing in the landscape, and if there's a food source, like some kind of pest in your yard, they'll come by because they want some food. You know, many birds can be effective at controlling as well, insects, right? So there are things that you don't necessarily need to buy. Maybe just wait for them to show up. Some predators that you might be familiar with, lady beetles, ladybugs is the colloquial term. They're technically a beetle. Lacewings, Those are little green flying insects. You see them a lot at night. Like if you leave your lights on, you'll see them on your windows. Predatory wasps, which you may or may not have seen. They're kind of interesting. Praying mantids, which there's a few species that all look similar, have a similar effect. Dragon and damselflies, these are really good predators, but they need a wet area nearby. Assassin bugs, again, very effective. Ground beetles. Spiders, of course, catch a whole bunch of different things, and hoverflies. So this is not an exhaustive list by any means, but those are some of the more common ones that you'd see in your landscape. And they either eat them directly, or on the case of parasitoids, which we're going to talk about next, they raise their young on that pest. So this is kind of gruesome, but parasitoids are organisms whose immature stages either develop within or attached to the outside of an insect, referred to as the host. So they are a parasite on that pest. Typically, what we see around here are going to be parasitic wasps. And they are wasps that have this really long tail. It almost looks like a stinger. It's called an ovipositor. And they use that to lay their eggs inside of other insects, which is kind of gnarly. So you know, it works really well though. So there are endoparasitoids. These hatch within the host from eggs or larvae laid by the adult female. This is something that you can often buy. There are, not from us, but there are organizations that specialize in these things, like Sound Horticulture is one up in Washington. A lot of greenhouses that are trying to grow their crops commercially and organically will use these as a control. But yeah, those are generally work quite well. You'll see these a lot on, like, well, not a lot, but sometimes you'll see tomato hornworms that have little white dots all over them, and those could be the eggs from a parasitic wasp. So sometimes just waiting for those beneficials to show up can take care of the issue. And then there are also ectoparasitoids that hang on to the outside of the host and feed through the host's skin, sucking out the body fluids. So kind of like a tick on humans, but imagine that for insects instead. Either way, they take care of the issue. Again, they will not eliminate the pest, but they'll reduce the numbers to the point where maybe you don't need to worry about it anymore. Again, this list is not exhaustive by any means, but this is a good smattering of things that can be quite effective, safe, organic. You know, it's not going to cause any harm to the non-target stuff generally. And if you can cultivate a good habitat for them by having a variety of flowers, maybe a water source nearby, they can persist in your garden. It's not just a one-time buy and then they're gone. They can hang out for a while. And that'll kind of help us segue more into the pollinator side of things. So, kind of like I mentioned earlier, there are some pests that are recognized as being just pests all the time, like grasshoppers. Nobody really wants them in their yard necessarily. There are some pests that may be only damaged during a certain stage of their life cycle, like the monarch butterflies, the example I gave. They eat milkweed. I've got some milkweed just over here. The little larvae of those monarchs will eat the foliage, and if you got a lot of monarchs, it could even kill your plant. Not very likely, but sometimes they can be quite destructive. So if you've got a plant and there's something crawling around there eating it, again, ID, find out if you even need to treat it, because it might be that weird looking little worm turns into some kind of beautiful butterfly or moth that you'll want to keep around. So the life cycle of that particular insect really varies, and sometimes they do cause damage to your yard. There are pollinators like bees and butterflies we're all familiar with that just generally they're going to help facilitate fertilization. Without pollinators, plant and animal populations would decline and collapse. You might not love bugs, but without them, we wouldn't survive. So you want to make sure to support them as much as you can, as long as they're the right kinds. But they're the food source either for, they're going to be beneficial to us directly by pollinating our food crops, or they might benefit us indirectly by, being a food source for something else that helps us, or it might just be totally neutral. Regardless, it's not causing harm to your landscape in any significant way. Maybe it's worth just letting them do their thing. So bees, butterflies, everybody knows those. Beetles as well. There are many beetles that pollinate. Wasps and hornets.
Oh, they can go away. away forever.
They serve their role.
Oh, no.
I know they can be a little aggressive sometimes, but they do pollinate.
I don't care.
Yeah, they eat aphids. They're very effective predators.
And if they get too close to you, just get the Windex out and spray them.
Yeah, they do serve their role. I get it. It's not.
Like pond, the bees love it.
Yeah.
And the wasps and the yellow jackets.
You don't need to invite them into your house,
Yeah.
but maybe there's a spot in your landscape where you can let them do their thing, because they are very effective at pollinating and taking care of a lot of pests. Moths, it's not necessarily something you'd think of as being pretty, but just like butterflies, they are very effective pollinators. There are lots of plants that maybe only bloom at night. That's something that a moth's going to pollinate because they're nocturnal. There are beautiful moths out there too.
I think that
No. Yeah, exactly. Hoverflies too. I don't know if anyone's seen a hoverfly. They kind of look like a bee, but they're an actual fly, so they're more closely related to like house flies. They have stripes like a bee. They fly a little differently. They hover, hence the name. They're a wonderful generalist pollinator. They go for a bunch of different stuff.
You know, the big black ones that look like bees, kind of.
Yeah.
Those good or bad? I think they're cool, but I remember as a little girl them bugging my grandpa's horses.
Yeah, they're annoying, but they're a food source for a lot of other predatory things. That's the thing. Even the pests that are annoying to you can be a food source for the beneficial stuff. So, for an example, let's say, yeah, you got horseflies, you've got aphids, maybe you have some beetles that you don't like. Something like a dragonfly could take care of all those, or like some kind of wasp could take care of all those. If you treat those problems, there might not be enough of a food source for those beneficials to exist in your landscape. So if you're taking care of a particular pest, but you want beneficials to come around for something else, it's not necessarily going to work like that. If you want more beneficial pollinators or predatory insects in your yard, you do need to be a little more careful with the kind of treatments you're doing, whether that's chemical sprays or just how you manage your pests in your landscape. Because for these beneficials to show up naturally, they do need a more intact ecosystem, right? In just a moment. Yep, almost there. Then I'm going to talk a little bit about honeybees and native bees too. So everybody knows honeybees. That's our state insect in Utah. We're the beehive state, right? They're not native here, okay? Which means they didn't evolve in this ecosystem. They evolved in Europe and parts of Asia, North Africa. They're a great generalist pollinator. They make honey, of course, which you all know and love, but they do have a bit of a downside in that when they exist in a particular area, they tend to be pretty territorial and they push out other bees or other beneficial insects. So there are a lot of native bees in Utah. They don't necessarily look like honeybees. Some of them are really tiny, like little sweat bees. Some like mason carpenter bees are much bigger. Some of them might be black or green or all yellow. Some of them look like wasps. Some of them look like beetles. There's a staggering diversity. Utah alone, as you can see on here, has over 1,000 species, over 20% of the named North American species. So we have a lot in Utah. We have more than the entire east coast of the US put together. So we have some incredible diversity here that's well worth supporting. There's a few things I brought up, a couple of native plants like the milkweed, the gambler oak, and the goldenrod, that you'll see all kinds of weird bees that you haven't seen before on those. It's really fun to observe. When people are talking about saving the bees and bees are declining, they're not talking about honeybees. Honeybees are doing just fine. They're more livestock at this point than anything. People, grow them for commercial use or for personal use at home. But the native bees are the ones that are declining precipitously due to habitat loss, inappropriate pesticide use. Again, there's a time and a place for it. There's a lot of different things. And they don't nest in hives like honeybees do. They nest, many of them are solitary, so they nest by themselves. Maybe they nest in the ground. They nest in old plant stems over the winter. Leaf cutter bees, has anyone seen those here? They're kind of odd. We get a lot of folks that come in, what's happening? Something's eating my tree. Maybe like a redbud, for example. and there's these perfect semicircular cuts taken out of the edges of the leaf. It's not harmful to your tree. That's a leaf cutter bee. That's the name, going out and cutting some leaves. They roll those they roll those leaves into tubes, and that's how they lay their eggs and protect their young. So that's another one where it's like, okay, maybe it seems like a pest because it's causing cosmetic damage to your plant. Ultimately, they're still pollinating stuff in the area, so they're beneficial to keep around. So sometimes even just the damage they cause can be indicative of what it might be. Like leaf cutter bees, it's always a very smooth semicircular cut. That's just one example of a beneficial that we have here. Let's see if there's anything else I want to talk about first.
I love looking at all my flower beds, my perennial beds, and just seeing like 20 or 30 different types of bees and stuff in my flower beds.
No, really cool.
Yeah,
we have a ton of interesting ones here. If you just come and spend time in the nursery, you see all kinds of weird insects, which is really cool. I did want to talk a little bit about invasive pests. We touched on that earlier, but I'll go over it a little more here. Again, those are pests that did not evolve in this area, and so they might not have any natural control. We don't really have too many significant ones in Utah, thankfully, but like in the eastern US, they have lots of problems with invasive pests that cause billions, yes, billions with a B, dollars worth of damage to food production and even just in your landscape. We have relatively few, a really good Department of Agriculture here that helps to manage that. But invasive pests, those are ones that maybe you do need to reach for the more destructive synthetic chemicals to control them. Because there won't really be natural controls, and some of the biological controls might not work as well. So those are kind of an exception to what I spoke about earlier. And yeah, most of that. Start on, we can do questions now. Yeah. All right. We can just rotate through. So let's go first. Okay.
Are there any natural